2023 was a crazy year for NBA trades. A ton of stars moved, some trades that led directly to NBA titles, and the fun thing about going back and looking at these trades is now you can actually look and see what happened to these draft picks, what value teams actually got. So I wanted to go back and regrade every big trade from 2023. If we're going in order, we begin with Kyrie Irving to the Dallas Mavericks in February. The Nets got Spencer Dinwiddie, Dorian Finney-Smith, 2 seconds, and a 2029 Dallas first, and the Mavs got Kyrie Irving. Now, if you can take yourself back in time to February 2023, this was a very weird time for the Brooklyn Nets. Kevin Durant had just requested a trade. It became clear that that era of Nets basketball was going to be coming to an end, and Durant is the next trade that we're going to be talking about. But first, they traded away Kyrie Irving, and at the time, there really weren't that many teams overly interested in Kyrie. He just had a weird situation with Brooklyn. Everybody knew that he was talented, but there weren't a ton of suitors. It was basically Dallas, as it turned out, and then the Lakers. And the Lakers weren't even sure that they were willing to give up a first-round pick in order to get Kyrie Irving. They had the Westbrook trade that they could have made at the time, or the contract they could have traded, I should say, and the Lakers decided not to do it. So the Mavs end up with Kyrie Irving. Now, in terms of compensation, a couple of other pieces have been moved here since for the Nets. They had Dinwiddie, who played for them for a little bit, then they moved him for Schroeder, and Schroeder just got traded as the recording of this video to the Warriors, so they got a couple of extra second-round picks out of this deal as well. In terms of grades, for the Nets, I gave them a B. In terms of value and in terms of how good Kyrie has been for Dallas, they really did not get much in return. Obviously, TBD on what that future first ends up becoming, but they can still get some value out of Dorian Finney-Smith. They get a couple of second-round picks, and they just kind of had to get rid of Kyrie. Like, he was not under contract for the following offseason. The situation was weird at the time. There weren't a lot of suitors, so I didn't give them too negative of a grade here, but obviously, in terms of value and how good Kyrie's been for Dallas, they didn't do very well. For Dallas, I gave them an A grade. They end up making the finals. Kyrie's a huge part of that, and they really didn't give up that much. We don't know what the 2029 first is going to be, but now, if you could let the Mavs do that trade over again, they do it 100 out of 100 times. It's turned out to be a fantastic deal for them. And connected to that is the next trade we're going to talk about. Also in February, the Nets traded Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant like a few days apart. Kevin Durant ends up going to Phoenix. The Suns get Durant, and the Nets get Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, 4 future first unprotected, a 2028 first round unprotected swap from the Suns, and that 2023 first round pick already has been used, of course, and that was used to select Noah Clowney. And of course, in terms of compensation, a lot has changed with this trade since it happened initially. The Nets traded Mikal Bridges to the Knicks for a bunch of other first round picks, and they also used some of these Phoenix picks to trade with Houston to get their own first round picks back, some of their own first round picks back, including in the 2025 draft, which could be a top 3 pick, and it's a very, very talented draft class. And as of this recording, Cam Johnson is still on the team. They could get a couple of first round picks for him as well. Potentially, the Nets could end up with double digit, like 12 first round picks in exchange for Kevin Durant. So you might assume this is going to be a fantastic grade for them. I didn't give them that high of a grade. I gave them a B+ because anytime you're trading away Kevin Durant, regardless of the mountain of future first round picks that they got, you're just never really going to get great value. No team wants to trade away someone like Kevin Durant. You always want to be the team receiving Kevin Durant. And it's just, when a player is that good, there's really no value you can get back unless you're getting a star in return. The Nets could end up getting a bunch of role players with these first round picks in exchange for Durant. And obviously that's terrible value for them. For the Suns, I gave them a B grade because if Durant isn't healthy, which it seems like he isn't going to be, he's going to continue to have those issues, you're not getting what you traded for. Like, they traded for Kevin Durant to build a true contender for a team that's going to contend for titles. They haven't won a single playoff series, and Durant has had a lot of injury issues this year. The upside for them is they're really good when he plays, but if he's never going to play and there's going to be this age concern, declining play concern, eventually he's still awesome for them. But when you give up this much value, especially on into the future, and the guy just doesn't play as much as you want him to, it's hard to give them a really good grade. But trading for possibly injury-prone guys was kind of a theme in 2023 because those were the 2 big deadline deals at the time. And then we move on to the summer of 2023. In June, the Celtics traded for Kristaps Porzingis. It was actually a 3-team deal. The Celtics got KP, the 25th pick in the 2023 draft, and a future Golden State Warriors first. The Grizzlies got Marcus Smart, and the Wizards got Tyus Jones, some contracts, and the 35th pick in the 2023 draft. And when you just read that now, it's kind of crazy to see that not only did the Celtics get Kristaps Porzingis out of this deal, but they got draft compensation as well, and that's because Memphis really wanted Marcus Smart. This was a big deal at the time. The biggest part of this trade was not Kristaps Porzingis at the time that it was made. The biggest part of this trade was the fact that the Celtics traded away Marcus Smart. And Memphis hasn't really gotten great value out of Smart so far. He was hurt last year. He's been hurt some this year as well, but they really felt like he was the missing piece for a team that was a rising contender potentially in the Western Western Conference, and that's why the draft compensation looks the way that it does. And of course, for the Celtics, this leads directly to a title. Despite the fact that Kristaps Porzingis didn't really even play that much in the playoffs last year, he makes them so much better as a team. He was awesome in the regular season last year. Obviously, he's been hurt to begin this year, but when he's on the floor, it makes such a huge difference. And anytime you trade for that big of a piece and then immediately go and win the title the next year, it's obviously an awesome trade for them. But there's a reason why the compensation was the way that it was. He had a lot of injury issues in the past. He had one really good season in Washington where his post-up numbers looked better. He just looked like a more confident offensive player. And the Celtics felt like that was the missing piece for them. They moved a bunch of stuff around in this offseason, as we're going to talk about later, and all of it ended up working out fantastic for them. It should not surprise you to know that the Celtics get an A+++ grade here for me, not only because of KP, but they get future draft compensation as well. For the Grizzlies, I gave them like a B- just because Smart really hasn't been that impactful. He hasn't been healthy, which is a problem, but you kind of knew that at the time when you traded for Marcus Smart. Still room for that grade to improve. We just haven't gotten a lot of Marcus Smart so far in Memphis. And then for the Wizards, I gave them a C- just because I know it was a sign and trade. KP was under contract, but obviously they didn't get a ton out of the deal. Some interesting things in terms of compensation before we move on to the next deal. The Celtics used the 25th pick in the draft just to get a couple of seconds, and then they used that Warriors pick in a trade we're going to talk about later on where they get Jrue Holiday, and then the Wizards actually end up with that pick eventually and select Bub Carrington, who I think is pretty good. Also in June of 2023, we have the Phoenix Suns once again involved trading for Bradley Beal. This was one of the most shocking trades I've ever seen at the time that it happened in terms of the compensation, in terms of the practicality of it. I didn't think that the Suns of all teams were going to be able to get Beal. It was like them and Miami and a couple other teams. Wasn't a ton of interest. It was a really difficult deal to try and make happen, and it's extremely complicated, but essentially here's the bones of the trade. The Wizards get Chris Paul, Landry Shamet, Bilal Coulibaly, just because they swapped picks with Indiana, and 4 future first-round pick swaps from Phoenix and 6 second-round picks. The Pacers got Jarris Walker. Again, they swapped 7th and 8th picks with Washington, 2 second-round picks, and the Suns got Bradley Beal, Jordan Goodwin, and Isaiah Todd. And this was pretty shocking at the time because we'd seen stars not necessarily on the same level as Bradley Beal. It's not like they were going to get a Kevin Durant level return in exchange for Bradley Beal, but people thought they were going to get something, right? And then once the deal came through that it was Phoenix, we didn't really understand how it was going to be Phoenix because they had already traded all of their picks away. So essentially, if the Wizards are not better than the Suns at any point from now to 2030, which depending on how things go is a real possibility, they will not be getting any value out of those pick swaps. They have to swap picks with Phoenix, and if Phoenix isn't ahead of them, there's no value in swapping those picks. So essentially, you traded away Bradley Beal for some seconds, and then obviously they flipped one pick from Indiana, moved up one spot, got Bilal Coulibaly. But it might surprise you that I actually have a good grade on this deal for Washington. I gave them a B+ for a very simple reason. They might, at some point, be better than Phoenix over the next couple years, so that's obviously good, but we now know just how difficult it would have been for them to trade Bradley Beal at any point. He hasn't been healthy in Phoenix. He hasn't been particularly good in Phoenix. They're still trying to figure out a way to get that group to play well together, especially when KD isn't playing. And even though, yeah, the compensation isn't fantastic, that's one of the worst contracts in all of sports. He still has a no trade clause, just like he had at the time. So the value is going to be limited. You can dock them points, I guess, for having the no trade clause on him in the first place, but that made it an extremely difficult situation. Given the circumstance, I give them like a B+ grade. For the Suns, I gave them a D because, like I said, this is one of the worst contracts in all of sports. Bradley Beal is making a ton of money. He hasn't been that effective. And even if they wanted to trade him, there are rumors about them potentially getting Jimmy Butler. That hasn't happened as of this recording. They can't use Bradley Beal's contract, which is a bad contract in the first place, unless he agrees to let them use it because he has the no trade clause. Yeah, they didn't give up that much, but Bradley Beal has not been that additive, and they could have gotten something better with all those future swaps that they sent out to Washington. The Pacers, I really didn't even give them a grade because they're kind of not really involved here other than swapping around some picks. And even though I like Coulibaly, that draft stuff, we haven't exactly figured out who got the better end of that deal. Related to that, we also have another really surprising one. I'm telling you, this was an active year for trades. In July, in that offseason, Chris Paul ends up getting moved to the Warriors. Now, this was a deal that surprised a lot of people just because the Warriors ended up moving on so quickly from someone like Jordan Poole. The Wizards got Patrick Baldwin, Jordan Poole, Ryan Rollins, and a 2030 Warriors first, as well as a 2027 second round pick, and the Warriors got Chris Paul. And the concept was, okay, the Warriors are going to add Chris Paul to this team. They feel like can really make some noise. They get out of the Jordan Poole contract, and maybe there's some semblance of this team that works really well with Chris Paul on the ball, Steph playing off the ball more. But I said this at the time. This deal was more about contract flexibility, getting out of the Jordan Poole money with the way the CBA was changing, with how disruptive and restrictive it was to have so much money on the books the way the Golden State did. Like, they had Jordan Poole, Wiggins, Draymond, Steph. They still had Clay at the time. They had all this money. Other guys that were going to get paid soon, they had to get out of the Poole contract, and so they were willing to attach a first-round pick to Jordan Poole. They signed the contract to just a year prior just to bring in Chris Paul because he was on an expiring contract, essentially. So that really was the motivation for Golden State, whereas Washington was buying low on Jordan Poole, getting some draft compensation, and just folding in more stuff that they're getting in exchange from the previous Beal trade where they got Chris Paul to try and make this deal happen. For the Wizards, I gave them a B+ for this trade as well. Obviously, the Poole contract is not very good, but along their timeline, it's not that big of a deal. It's kind of like the Nets with Ben Simmons. Like, eventually it's going to be an expiring that maybe you can use, but for now, he's just kind of being on the team. But I like the fact that they got the future first. Who knows where the Warriors are going to be at that point when that first actually becomes available to Washington. And given that Chris Paul didn't really help the Warriors that much, I like the value there. For Golden State, I gave them a C. Paul wasn't that impactful. He was hurt for a good amount of the year as well, which is something you have to come to expect when you have Chris Paul on your team. Giving up a future first is not something that anybody would do now in exchange for Chris Paul, I don't think. So bad value there for the Warriors in the deal. But again, they got out of the contract, which was the main motivation for the trade. So that's everything for the summer, but we're not done with trades yet. There were two absolutely massive deals that were connected to each other in the fall before the season actually started. In September of 2023, the Trailblazers finally traded away Damian Lillard. All of the speculation at the time was that he was going to go to the Heat. That's where he wanted to go. The trade made sense, but the Trailblazers just weren't that interested in trading with the Heat. They wanted to get the best value they could, and ultimately, to them, that meant that the Bucks were going to get Damian Lillard. The Trailblazers get Jrue Holiday, 2028 and 2030 Milwaukee pick swaps, a 2029 Milwaukee first, DeAndre Ayton, Tamani Kamara, and the Suns get Grayson Allen, Keon Johnson, Nasir Little, and Yusuf Nurkic. This is an incredibly complicated trade. At the time, I understood the move for Milwaukee. Obviously, it hasn't worked out fantastic for them necessarily, but I understood getting rid of Jrue Holiday, adding more offense to the team. The Damian Lillard Giannis combination offensively looked absolutely terrifying at the time that they made the deal, and they are always on Giannis watch. They're always concerned about Giannis potentially leaving, and so they wanted to try and shake things up and bring in Damian Lillard. For Phoenix, they just wanted to get rid of Ayton and bring in a different big man, and they were willing to give up some assets in order to do it. And of course, Portland is just trying to get any kind of value they can out of Dame to kind of restart their team and rebuild. In terms of grades, I gave the Bucks a B. They did give up a bunch of stuff, and I'm not positive that they're better. I'm not positive that if you ask Milwaukee right now that they wouldn't just take that back and just keep Jrue Holiday, keep those assets, maybe use it on somebody else. But still, I'm going to give them a B grade. For Portland, I give them a B+ because they end up getting more stuff out of this deal because they trade away Jrue Holiday, which I'm going to talk about here in a second. And then the Suns get a B because they got out of the DeAndre Ayton thing, which his contract has been bad, and I don't think he's been particularly good in Portland. They get Grayson Allen, which is nice. I don't really think you're all that excited, though, about having Yusuf Nurkic on your team at the moment, so they end up with a B. The things that could change this moving forward is what Portland ends up getting out of that future draft compensation. This could end up being an awesome trade for them, and then maybe Ayton ends up actually being really good for them. They clearly were excited about that part and targeted him at the time. The ironic thing is they have a bunch of bigs now. They kind of don't really need Ayton because they ended up getting Robert Williams, which we're going to talk about in a second. They drafted Donovan Clingan. They kind of don't need DeAndre Ayton, but we'll see kind of how that value works out for them. A very complicated deal, and one that I'm excited to regrade again here in a couple of years once we kind of have a better idea of how this all shook out for each of these teams. And then last up, the last big trade of 2023 was in October, and the Celtics ended up trading for Jrue Holiday. Of course, this leads directly to a title, more so than the KP trade did, just because KP didn't play a ton in the playoffs. And at the time that this happened, everybody knew, how did the Celtics end up going from Marcus Smart to getting Kristaps Porzingis and Jrue Holiday? Basically, that's how the swap worked out. The Celtics get Jrue Holiday, Portland gets Malcolm Brogdon, Robert Williams, a 2024 first, and a Boston 2029 first. So when you go back to what Boston got in exchange for Marcus Smart, the draft compensation basically evens out between KP and Jrue Holiday. So then they basically traded Brogdon, Robert Williams, and Marcus Smart for Kristaps Porzingis and Jrue Holiday, and those are two key pieces of what eventually becomes a title team. And this is probably the biggest win-win trade of the entire video. The Celtics obviously get like an A+ times 1,000, unbelievable value, perfect fit. They've got Jrue Holiday signed long-term as well. Perfect situation for him to be in as well. And then Portland, this is good value. Like, you get the future first. Robert Williams looks like he could be something, and Jrue Holiday was a valuable part to them of the initial Damian Lillard trade, and the risk that they took of taking on that contract and hoping that they could later fold in another team without it actually being a 3-team deal at the time ends up working out really well for them. The only other note here in terms of compensation is that the first round pick that Boston trades to Portland, the 2024 Warriors first, ends up actually getting moved to Washington as a result of the Denny Avdija trade. So Portland kind of gets Denny out of this deal as well, while Washington ends up with Bub Carrington. And so that's where all the grades are for me for right now for the biggest trades of 2023. But I can't wait to do not only other years, but also look at these again in 4 or 5 years and really see how these broke down.